The courtroom hummed with the usual anticipation, lawyers rustling papers, spectators whispering in hushed tones, and the distant, rhythmic pounding of a gavel from another chamber. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat at the bench, her gaze steady and professional. Another day, another case. At least, that's what she thought. The bailiff's voice rang through the room. The state of Louisiana versus James Anderson. Eleanor shifted slightly in her seat, her hands resting on the polished oak of the bench. Her eyes flickered to the case file in front of her. Assault. Robbery. Resisting arrest. A familiar ache settled in her chest, the quiet disappointment of another lost soul tangled in the system. She exhaled softly. Then the defendant was brought in. The world tilted. The man standing before her, shackled at the wrists and ankles, was not a stranger. He was James Anderson. Her James. Her throat tightened as memories surged forward, unbidden and relentless. Summer afternoons racing bicycles down the dusty streets of Hammond, Louisiana. Late-night whispers beneath the old magnolia tree in her backyard. The promise they'd made as children, to always have each other's backs, no matter what. But the man before her wasn't the boy she remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his face lined with years of hardship. His skin, once smooth with youthful defiance, was now worn, etched with stories she had never been there to hear. Yet his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, were the same. Eleanor's grip on the gavel faltered. For the first time in her career, she hesitated. The walls of the courtroom seemed to shrink, pressing in on her as she struggled to process the impossible. James lifted his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, recognition flickered in his expression. But just as quickly, his eyes lowered, his posture one of quiet resignation. The courtroom waited. Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Mr. Anderson, you stand accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead?" His voice, rougher than she remembered, carried across the silent room. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her heart pounded. She wanted to stop everything. She wanted to demand answers. What happened to you, James? How did we end up here? But her role as a judge demanded composure. "Proceed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. A lifetime ago. As the prosecutor began his opening statement, Eleanor's mind drifted, slipping past the years, back to a time before black robes and courtrooms. She and James had grown up on opposite sides of Hammond. Not far apart in distance, but separated by the unspoken rules of their town. Her family's home, a modest, one-story house with a white picket fence, stood in contrast to James's weathered house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by fields. Their friendship was an anomaly, a quiet rebellion against a world that wanted to keep them apart. She remembered the day they met. She had wandered too far from her backyard, following the winding creek that cut through town. James had been there, fishing, his line tangled in the reeds. She had helped him, and that small act of kindness turned into something bigger. Years of shared adventures. Secret meetings. Dreams whispered into the night. "Eleanor," he had once said, lying on the grass beside her, staring at the stars. "You ever think about leaving this place? Like really getting out, going somewhere people don't look at us funny just for sitting together?" She had laughed then, brushing it off as another one of James's wild ideas. But he hadn't been joking. Even as a child, James had understood the world in a way she hadn't yet. Their bond deepened despite the whispers, the disapproving glances, the weight of a town that did not make space for them. And then, one day, it ended. It was the summer before high school. Eleanor's father had caught them sitting on the porch together. His voice had been cold. "Sharp. Eleanor. Get inside. Now." She had hesitated, looking at James, her heart hammering. "Go on," he had murmured, his voice quiet, resigned. "I'll see you around." But she never saw him again. Her father forbade her from going near James, and soon after, James's family moved away. She buried herself in school, channeling every ounce of her energy into something that would take her far beyond Hammond. She went to law school, became a judge, chased justice, but she never forgot James. "Now," the prosecutor's voice snapped her back to the present. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he declared, "this case is about violence. It's about a man who walked into a convenience store and, without provocation, attacked an innocent clerk before stealing the cash register's contents. The evidence will show that James Anderson is guilty of this crime." Eleanor's stomach twisted. The prosecutor's tone was clinical, detached, reducing James to nothing more than a name on a docket. She stole a glance at James. His posture was slouched, his hands clasped in front of him, but his face remained unreadable. Did he really do it? Or was there more to the story than the prosecution claimed? The defense attorney, Lisa Porter, rose to speak. She was young but confident, her voice steady. The prosecution would have you believe this case is straightforward, Lisa said. But it's not. My client, James Anderson, has maintained his innocence from the start. We will show that the assumptions made on the night of his arrest do not hold up under scrutiny. The first witness was called, a store clerk who had been working the night of the incident. He described seeing a man fitting James's description enter the store, argue with the cashier, and then. Eleanor barely heard the words. Her mind raced. The past had crashed into the present, and she was standing in the wreckage. James Anderson was no longer a memory. He was here, and she had to decide, was she just a judge today? Or was she still the girl who once lay in the grass beside him, dreaming of escape? Because if she was both, then this case was about to become something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. He lunged over the counter, Mr. Chambers said, his voice steady. But Eleanor noticed the way his fingers twitched against the stand, the slight hesitation in his eyes. Lisa Porter, James's defense attorney, approached him with calculated ease. Mr. Chambers, you stated that the man who attacked the clerk was wearing a red hoodie. Is that correct? Yes. Did you see his face clearly? A pause. Uncertainty. Not really. It was dark, and he had the hood up. Lisa nodded, pacing slightly. So you're saying you couldn't definitively identify the individual who committed the assault? Well, no, but. No further questions. Lisa cut him off smoothly,